All right, so we are back with On Dialogue by David Bohm. I am going to be reading through this book on YouTube. So yeah, I think we should just jump right in. Chapter 2, On Dialogue. The way we start a dialogue group is usually by talking about dialogue, talking it over, discussing why we're doing it, what it means, and so forth. I don't think it is wise to start a group before people have gone into all that, at least somewhat. You can, but then you'll have to trust that the group will continue, and that these questions will come out later. So if you're thinking of meeting in a group, one thing which I suggest is to have a discussion or a seminar about dialogue for a while, and those who are interested can then go on to have the dialogue. And you mustn't worry too much about whether you are or are not having dialogue. That's one of the blocks. Maybe mixed. So we will discuss dialogue for a while. What is its nature? I give a meaning to the word dialogue that is somewhat different from what is commonly used. The derivations of words often help to suggest a deeper meaning. Dialogue comes from the Greek dialogos. Logos means the word, or in our case, we would think of it as the meaning of the word. And dia means through. It doesn't mean to. A dialogue can be among any number of people, not just two. So dia, through, logos, the word, through the word. Even one person can have a sense of dialogue within himself, if the spirit of the dialogue is present. The picture or image that this derivation suggests is of a stream of meaning flowing among and through us and between us. This will make possible a flow of meaning in the whole group, out of which may emerge some new understanding. It's something new which may have not been in the starting point at all. It's something creative. And this shared meaning is the glue or cement that holds people and societies together. Contrast this with the word discussion, which has the same root as percussion and concussion. It really means to break things up. It emphasizes the idea of analysis, where there may be many points of view and where everybody is presenting a different one, analyzing and breaking up. That obviously has its value, but it's limited and will never get us very far beyond our various points of view. Discussion is almost like a ping pong game, where people are battling the ideas back and forth, and the object of the game is to win or to get points for yourself. Possibly you'll take up someone else's ideas to back up your own. You may agree with some and disagree with others, but the basic point is to win the game. That's very frequently the case in a discussion. And that's really interesting. If that's the case, most things are are discussions on the internet. Like, you think about the way we communicate in these constrained platforms, and it's very much about winning points for your team. In a dialogue, however, nobody is trying to win. Everybody wins if anybody wins. There is a different sort of spirit to it. In a dialogue, there is no attempt to gain points or to make your particular view prevail. Rather, when any mistake is discovered on the part of anybody, everybody gains. It's a situation called win-win, where the other game is win-lose. If I win, you lose. But a dialogue is something more of a common participation, in which we are not playing a game against each other, but with each other. In a dialogue, everybody wins. It seems difficult to break the sort of habit of treating things as games, as games where someone wins. I think that's sort of the natural lever of power in the world is, you take rather than everyone gives to some sort of, shared pot. But of course, as he says, you need to be prepared for the dialogue. You need to be going into this with the expectation that everyone is going to have that same take on it. Excuse me. Clearly, a lot of what is called dialogue is not dialogue in the way I'm using the word. For example, people at the United Nations have been having what are often considered to be dialogues, but these are very limited. They are more like discussions, or perhaps trade-offs or negotiations than dialogues. The people who take part are not really open to questioning their fundamental assumptions. They are trading off minor points like negotiating whether we have a few more or fewer nuclear weapons. The whole question of two different systems is not being seriously discussed. It's taken for granted that you can't talk about that, and nothing will ever change that. Consequently, their discussions are not serious, not deeply serious. A great deal of what we call discussion is not deeply serious, in the sense there are all sorts of things which are held to be non-negotiable and not touchable, and people don't even want to talk about them. That is not part of our trouble. Now, why do we need dialogue? People have difficulty communicating even in small groups. But in a group of 30 or 40 or more, many may find it very hard to communicate unless there's a set purpose or unless somebody is leading it. Why is that? Well, for one thing, everybody has different assumptions and opinions. They are basic assumptions, not merely superficial assumptions, such as assumptions about the meaning of life, about your own self-interest, your country's interest, or your religious interest, about what you think is really important. And these assumptions are defended when they are challenged. People frequently can't resist defending them, and they tend to defend them with an emotional charge. Definitely true. We'll discuss that in more detail later, but I'll give you an example now. We organized a dialogue in Israel a number of years ago. At one stage, the people were discussing politics, and someone said, just in passing, Zionism is creating a great difficulty in good relations between Jews and Arabs. It's a principal barrier that's in the way. He said it very quietly. Then suddenly somebody else couldn't contain himself and jumped up. He was full of emotion. His blood pressure was high and his eyes were popping out. He said, without Zionism, the country would fall to pieces. Zionism? That fellow had one basic assumption, and the other person had another one. And these two assumptions were really in conflict. Then the question is, what can you do? You see, those are the kind of assumptions that are causing all the trouble politically all over the world. And the case I just described is relatively easier than some of the assumptions that we have to handle in politics. The point is that we have all sorts of assumptions, not only about politics or economics or religion, but also about what we think an individual should do, or what life is all about, and so forth. We could also call these assumptions opinions. An opinion is an assumption. The word opinion is used in several senses. When a doctor has an opinion, that's the best assumption that he can make based on the evidence. He may say, okay, I'm not quite sure, so let's get a second opinion. In that case, if he is a good doctor, he does not react to defend his assumption. If the second opinion turns to be different from his, he doesn't jump up with an emotional charge, such as the fellow did on the question of Zionism, and say, how could you say such things? The doctor's opinion would be an example of a rational sort of opinion, but most are not of that nature. Mostly they are defended with a strong reaction. In other words, a person identifies himself with them. They are tied up with an investment in self-interest. The point is that dialogue has to go into all the pressures that are behind our assumptions. It goes into the process of thought behind the assumptions, not just the assumptions themselves. Excuse me. Not used to talking for so long. Not much to say about this so far. He's kind of just making the point that a dialogue is a better form of conversation, which one hopes so. You get the sense he's not trying to, formalize it with rules in terms of how you're supposed to approach it, and more of when you have a dialogue, you just need to be aware of your own allegiances and your own opinions and assumptions and priors about the world. All right, heading dialogue and thought. It is important to see that the different opinions that you have are the result of past thought, all your experiences, what other people have said, and whatnot. So it's very sedimented. It's very built up over time from all these experiences you've had. That is all programmed into your memory. You may then identify with those opinions and react to defend them. But it doesn't make sense to do this. I'm not sure I agree with that, but let's find out what his reasoning is. If the opinion is right, it doesn't need such a reaction. Interesting. I guess. I mean, let's find out what he thinks right is. Let's see if he clarifies that. So if the opinion is right, it doesn't need such a reaction. And if it is wrong, why should you defend it? That's true, but no one is going to, acknowledge that they're holding wrong beliefs. I think the split of right and wrong is not the right one. Like not how you want to approach it, because I mean, I guess we'll see if he gets into this, but there's no real objective right or wrong. So I think the fact that people can hold inconsistent beliefs is kind of powerful, personally. Let's see. So if the opinion is right, it doesn't need such a reaction. If it's wrong, why defend it? If you're identified with it, however, you do defend it. It is as if you yourself are under attack when your opinion is challenged. Opinions thus tend to be experienced as truths, even though they may only be your own assumptions and your own background. And isn't that, again, kind of true for all truths? You got them from your teacher, your family, or by reading, or in some other way. Then for one reason or another, you are identified with them and you defend them. Dialogue is really aimed at going through the whole thought process and changing the way the thought process occurs collectively. We haven't paid much attention to thought as a process. We have engaged in thoughts, but we've only paid attention to the content, not to the process. Why does thought require attention? Everything requires attention, really. If we ran machines without paying attention to them, they would break down. Our thought, too, is a process, and it requires attention. Otherwise, it's going to go wrong. Okay, so dialogue, more about the process than sort of the opinions themselves, which is, I guess, what he's saying discussion is about. I'll try to give some examples of the difficulty in thinking in thought. One of these difficulties is fragmentation, which originates in thought. It is thought which divides everything up. Every division we make is a result of how we think. In actuality, the whole world is shades merging into one. And this is a big part of Bohm's thought. When we get into wholeness and implicate order, which I think, not sure when that was published relative to this. I think it may have been published earlier. His whole thing is trying to view the universe as sort of this one whole harmonious deal, and he's approaching it from the quantum mechanical level on one sense, but also as sort of an epistemological view as well. See, I have it, the undivided universe, and that's more of his scientific work. Let's see, where was I? Fragmentation, hang on. In actuality, the whole world is shades merging into one. But we select certain things and separate them from others, for convenience at first. Later, we give this separation great importance. We set up separate nations, which is entirely the result of our thinking, and then we begin to give them supreme importance. We also divide religions by thought. Separate religions are entirely a result of how we think. And in the family, the divisions are in thought. The whole way the family is set up is due to the way we think about it. And yeah, one feels the need to, like, I guess, jut in their opinion about how all of those things have a real ground. But I think Bohm would sort of respond that our thoughts have a real ground. Like when we call them thoughts, we're not trying to denigate them. We're not like making them making themselves separate, but rather those thoughts are real things in much the same way that sort of like natural geographic features are a real thing. Anyway. Fragmentation is one of the difficulties of thought, but there is a deeper root, which is that thought is very active, but the process of thought thinks it is doing nothing. That is, it is just telling you the way things are. That's really powerful. I really like that. Let's repeat that. Fragmentation is one of the difficulties of thought, but there is a deeper root, which is that thought is very active, but that the process of thinking thinks that it is doing nothing. It is just telling you the way things are. Wow, that's really powerful. Because it acknowledges sort of the basic thing I am doing right now of thinking about this text is an active process, and that's true of anytime I'm thinking about something. If I'm thinking about I should have a shower now or later, like that all, and clearly the answer is not often enough. That all leads to action. Like I'm thinking about how should I sequence my actions, and that thought itself is part of that. It leads to the action, in a sense, is the encoded version of the action. Like when we think, it is totally an active process. It's not like generic recall of truth. So almost everything around us has been determined by thought. All the buildings, factories, farms, roads, schools, nations, science, technology, religion, whatever you care to mention. Very true. I would add that all those things have been built by labor. And, of course, that labor is often planned through thought, but the only way it's executed is not purely through thought, but also through the construction of things, and that requires labor. The whole ecological problem is due to thought, because we have thought that the world is there for us to exploit, that is infinite, and no matter what we did, the pollution would get dissolved away. Very strong opinion there. Of course, I certainly agree with it, but not a ideologically neutral position. When we see a problem, whether pollution, carbon dioxide, or whatever, we then say, we've got to solve that problem. But we are constantly producing that sort of problem, not just that particular problem, but that sort of problem, by the way we go on with our thought. If we keep thinking that the world is there solely for our convenience, then we are going to exploit it in some other way, and we are going to make another problem elsewhere. We may clear up the pollution, but we may then create some other difficulty, such as economic chaos, if we can't do it right. We may clear up the virus, but we may create some other difficulty. We may set up genetic engineering, but if ordinary technology can produce such vast difficulties, imagine the kind of thing genetic engineering could get us into if we go on with the same way of thinking. I mean, yeah, that's, yes, of course. I mean, if this thing isn't engineered, and I have no reason to think it is, but it's so concerning that we're playing with the exact technologies that could produce this sort of virus. So I mean, yes, you see his point here. People will be doing genetic engineering for whatever suits their fancy and the way they think. The point is, thought produces results, but thought says it didn't do it, and that is a problem. I mean, in a way, thought didn't just do it. It's the labor, I guess. But is thought always prior to labor? In terms of these lights are really, I need to adjust the lighting, sorry. But to the point. Planning these sorts of large projects that he's talking about, the buildings, factories, farms, roads, schools, stations, science, technology, religion. Yeah, of course, there's sort of thought precedes action in that sort of anything that needs that level of planning to actually execute. We can say reasonably thought produces the results. But thought says it doesn't do it, and that is a problem. The trouble is the same. The trouble is that some of those results that thought produces are considered to be very important and valuable. Thought produces a nation, and it says that the nation has an extremely high value, a supreme value, which overrides almost everything else. The same may be said about religion. Therefore, freedom of thought is interfered with because if the nation has high value, it is necessary to continue to think that the nation has high value. Therefore, you've got to create a pressure to think that way. You've got to have an impulse and make sure everybody has got that impulse to go on thinking that way about his nation, his religion, his family, or whatever it is that he gives high value. He's got to defend it. You cannot defend something without first thinking the defense. There are those thoughts which might question the thing you want to defend, and you've got to push them aside. That may readily involve self-deception. You will simply push aside a lot of things you'd rather not accept by saying they are wrong, by distorting the issue, and so on. Thought defends its basic assumptions against evidence that they may be wrong. And I mean, you're now seeing this at sort of a global level, really, where I mean, you see how the media constructs consent, and in order to kind of buy into that, it requires that self-deception of sort of when someone tells you that something that's contrary to your own belief system. And unfortunately, a lot of people's belief systems have sort of been constructed, I don't want to say like by accident, but just sort of you can model as noise as to whether, you get sucked down one particular rabbit hole versus taking the mainstream rabbit hole. But regardless of which rabbit hole you're in, like, you're going to be the sort of mode of discourse is this: if you're in this other camp, you're wrong. Like, and I can't even begin to engage with you because they're so wrong, they're evil, right? Like, that's sort of the dominant mode of discourse now, and it's really bad. So in order to deal with this, we've got to look at thought, because the problem is originating in thought. Usually when you have a problem, you say, I must think about how to solve it. But what I'm trying to say is that thought is the problem. What, therefore, are we going to do? We can consider two kinds of thought, individual and collective. Individually, I can think of various things, but a great deal of thought is what we do together. In fact, most of it comes from basic collective background. Or, in fact, most of it comes from the collective background. Language is collective. Most of our basic assumptions come from our society, including all of our assumptions about how society works, about what sort of person we're supposed to be, and about what relationships, institutions, and so on. Therefore, we need to pay attention to thought both individually and collectively. And those basic assumptions are really encoded not just in thought, but in the artifacts of thought of, our books, of our language itself, and so on. In a dialogue, people coming from different backgrounds typically have different basic assumptions and opinions. In almost any group, you will probably find a great many different assumptions and opinions of which we are not aware at the moment. It is a matter of culture. In the overall culture, there are a vast number of opinions and assumptions which help make up that culture. And there are also subcultures that are somewhat different from one another according to ethnic groups, or to economic situations, or to race, religion, or thousands of other things. People will come to such a gathering from somewhat different cultures or subcultures with different assumptions and opinions. And they may not realize it, but they have some tendency to defend their assumptions and opinions reactively against evidence that they are not right, or simply a similar tendency to defend them against somebody who has another opinion. If we defend opinions in this way, we're not going to be able to have a dialogue. And we are often unconsciously defending our opinions. We don't usually do it on purpose. At times we may be conscious that we are defending them, but mostly we are not. We just feel that something is so true that we can't avoid trying to convince this stupid person how wrong it is to disagree with us. And yeah, of course, very true. Now, that seems the most natural thing in the world. It seems that that's inevitable. Yet, if you think of it, we can't really organize a good society if we go on that basis. That's the way democracy is supposed to work, but it hasn't. If everybody has a different opinion, it will be merely a struggle of opinions, and the one who is strongest will win. It may necessarily be the right one, It may be that none of them are right. Therefore, we won't be doing the right thing when we try to get together. This problem arises whenever people meet for dialogue, or legislators try to get together, or businessmen try to get together, or whatever. Yes, try to get together is repeated. If we all had to do a job together, we would likely find that each one of us would have different opinions and assumptions, and thus we would find it hard to do the job. The temperature could go way up. In fact, there are people facing this problem in large corporations. The top executives may have all different opinions, hence they can't get together. So the company doesn't work efficiently, it starts to lose money and goes under. There are some people who are trying to form groups where top business executives can talk together. If politicians would do that, it would be very good. Religious people would be the hardest to get together. The assumptions that different religions are so firmly embedded that I don't know of any case of two religions, or even subgroups of any given religion, where they ever got together once they had split. The Christian church, for instance, has always been talking about trying to get together for ages, and it just stays about the same all the time. They talk and they appear to get a little closer, and then it never happens. They talk about unity and oneness and love and all that, but the other assumptions are more powerful. They're programmed into us. Some religious people are trying to get together, but they really are sincere. They're about as serious as they can be, but it seems they cannot do it. Scientists also get in the same situation. Each one may hold to a different view of truth so that they can't get together, or they may have different self-interests. A scientist who is working for a company that produces pollution may have a certain self-interest in proving that pollution is not dangerous. And somebody else might have self-interest in proving that it is dangerous. And then perhaps somewhere there is an unbiased scientist who tries to judge it all. Science is supposed to be dedicated to truth and fact, and religion is supposed to be dedicated to another kind of truth and to love. But people's self-interest and assumptions take over. Now, we're not trying to judge these people. Something is happening, which is that assumptions or opinions are like computer programs in people's minds. These programs take over against the best of intentions. They produce their own intentions. All right, let's stop there for today. Almost coming up on a half hour. Not too much to say about this chapter so far. I think he's kind of repeating things that we're all very aware of. The built-in, our built-in assumptions determine who we are. We're going to act to defend those assumptions. Like nothing too surprising. But I certainly am interested to see how Bohm's version of dialogue solves those problems. So hopefully we'll get to that tomorrow or Monday, depending on what schedule I feel like doing.